everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today we're going to be making Luna Lapin's pyjamas from book 1. So this is the book here, and the pyjamas are on page 108 and are these ones just here. So if those are the ones that you want to sew along with me for, then hopefully you'll get to something that resembles this. So we've got some lovely pyjama bottoms on Wilhelmina here, and they've got the little press stud opening and the little wrap over top. So we've got a little hole for her tail at the back here and elasticated waist. So if you'd like to have a go at making these pyjamas with me, then please carry on watching along, because this is the video that I'm doing today. So this is the start of the videos that I announced in my Luna Lapin plans video, and hopefully people will have a look at that as well. And so I was doing up Luna's press stud, so she's fully dressed, not Luna's, Wilhelmina's pyjamas. So if you've enjoyed, if you would like to make some of these pyjamas, then watch along, because here's the video. So the pyjamas are featured in book 1, which is Making Luna Lapin, and if you turn to page 108, then you'll see a picture of Luna wearing her very striking red trimmed pyjamas there. And then if you then turn to the back pages to 138-ish, 139 and 140, then you'll get, and 141, you'll get the patterns for the pyjamas. Now, the thing I do want to say, a couple of things to note about the pyjamas. On here, pyjama front, the writing is actually upside down. So if you're new to patterns, this could confuse you, because actually that should be written upside down, because this here is the sleeve edge, and that there is the neck edge, and that's the fasteners down the front. So when you're writing, what I would do is I would turn your page round, and then I would then do as I've done on my front piece here, which is I've put it the right way round. So this is actually your pattern piece orientation, because if you're trying to match it up that way to your pyjamas, you're going to struggle. So that's the first thing. It might be obvious to some people, but again, my channel's all about pointing out what isn't obvious to people. The other thing that I want to point out is that on the sleeves here, the pattern for the sleeves. Now, on the pattern for the sleeves here, this edge here is slightly higher than this edge here. And so what I want you to do is I want you to get a pen, and of course I've put mine away. Get a pen, and I want you to draw 2 little triangles on one side of the sleeve and just 1 triangle on the other sleeve. We're not going to match them up, that just shows us that which is the back and which is the front. Okay, so I've done that on my sleeves here. I've got my 2 little notches there and my 1 little notch just there, because this will help you when you're orientating how to go, because the pyjamas are slightly higher at Luna's neck at the back. And then also on the pyjama back here, this is the sleeve edge here, and I want you to draw 2 little diamonds on there as well. So the sleeve back, not the sleeve back, the pyjama back is actually here. So in my book, I'm just putting 2 things there, because these are the universal pattern marking signs to say which is the front and which is the back on a seam. So that will work for you. And again, we've marked those on the front. On the front edge. So you've got your front edge here, and where it's upside down in your book, and you've got the 2 dots, those are my 2 dots there. So I've turned the piece round from being that way round, which is the wrong orientation. I've turned it, it's just been done that way to fit on the page. Still got my circles there to the right. This seam here to the left, just put 1 little notch on there, because that's where we want to match up. When we've got this together, we want to match up those 2 seams there. They won't match up perfectly, but as long as they're in the same on the same run, if you like, of the seam, then we'll be fine. So we've done that, Other thing is that the pattern for the pyjama legs is in 2, well, it's actually in 3 places. You've got a facing here, which looks like this, and that's a separate piece, so we cut that separately. And then here we've got a piece that fits on the bottom here, And it does say at the bottom, join here, but if you're confused by it, that's absolutely understandable, you might be, because over here, there's another piece here that says join here. So I've traced both pieces out onto my tracing paper, but I've just left a little strip here that I can join it with. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pop those one on top of each other. Let me move the book out of the way, you'll be able to see better on the work surface, won't you? Is take my two pattern pieces here, put one on top of the other, and that will match perfectly if you've traced it out correctly. And then all I'm going to do is just put some sellotape across there just to hold that, and I will cut that out as one piece. So don't cut this out as two separate pieces. This is just one piece. It was just too big to fit on one page in the books. That's the way that they've done it. So if you'd like to go ahead and find the pattern in your book, trace out your pattern pieces. As I say, you should have the two pieces that make up the bottom of the leg because they're in two separate pieces. You should have a facing as well, which sits at the top of the waistband there. So that's the pieces for the PJ bottoms. And then for the back, you should have a front, not for a back, for the top, you should have a front, a back, which has got to be cut on the fold, so that'll be double. And then you've got your sleeves, which will fit in between these two sections here when we finally start sewing that together. So if you want to get to that stage, then we'll talk about fabrics and trims. So next we ought to talk about fabrics really, and I've got a medley here to show you. Pyjamas generally are something that's quite lightweight, so you don't want to be using anything that's too thick, especially when we're going to be managing and manipulating this piece for this facing as well. So we don't want anything too thick. I do find that the thinner quilting cotton is actually a nice fabric to use, and I think this is what I'm going to be using for my pyjamas today, this lovely peachy spot. So I'll just pop that to one side, but that's a really nice fabric. Otherwise, something like a cotton lawn is very nice, and this is, I think hopefully you can see on the camera that this is quite stiff, and this has got is a lot smoother. So a cotton lawn is a beautiful fabric. It may be that you've got a make me kit or a remake kit as well from Cool Crafting. You can get those as well that are available over on their website, and I'll pop a link up for their website so that you can go and have a look there if you want to. Alternatively, then this is a perfect time to use old shirts. So I've got a couple of, well, 2 or 3 shirts here that I've used from my husband, and this is quite a stiff fabric, but it's still very thin and it's very durable. And again, these can have some lovely fabrics that are available in old shirting, and there's a video on my channel as well for how to salvage your fabric from a shirt most effectively so that you can store it. So I do go through my charity shop bag, if you like, and anything that I think could be reused again for anything to do with Luna, then I do use, or any other projects as well. So those are good ones to use for making your pyjamas. Let me just pop that away for a second. The other thing that we need to really talk about as well is the trim that you're going to use as well, because if we go back to the page in the book, sorry, lots of noises. We've gone past it, haven't I? 108, I think. So 108, we can see that she's got this embroidered edge, bias binding on the edge here. And it's very, very pretty. Now, somewhere in my stash, I've got some cream bias binding with this little embroidered edge that I bought. But can I find it? No, it's not anywhere that I can find. So I'm going to use a different kind of bias. I'm still going to use a bound edge, which is this one I'm going to use here, which is a purchased brown bound edge or a bias edge. And all the difference is that it's just been folded in half like this, and then it's had some embroidery on the edge there. And that should match quite nicely onto my pyjamas for Luna today, I think. The alternative is that you could use something like this. The only thing that you've got to bear in mind when you're choosing your trim is that if we look at, say, on this on the front pattern, where's the front pattern gone? Front here. Okay. So down this edge here, this is the longer of the two edges, and down here as well, and then across the hem, we're going to be applying this bias edging. Now, the bias edging opens out like this, but what we're going to be doing with it with the pyjamas is we're actually going to be encasing the edge of our fabric so that the fabric, this was the fabric piece, fits actually right in the middle there, and then we'll sew it all the way through and it'll neaten it off. So that means that this edge here and this edge here and across the bottom here and also on the bottom of the sleeves, because the trim is on the bottom of the sleeves and the bottom of the pyjama legs as well, doesn't have any seam allowance because this binding goes right up to the seam allowance and goes right over the edge. So you need to bear that in mind, because it may be that you add another 1/4 of an inch on there so that you've got something to zigzag and then fold under. So if I was using this kind of trim, I would zigzag, I would add on 1/4 of an inch. I would then zigzag the fabric as well when I've cut it out, and then I would then sew the line, the edging onto the fabric and then fold it over like that so that the trim was sticking out. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody, because you've got to add, so I do the same there, the same on the bottom of the sleeve, 1/4 of an inch, and the same on the bottom of the trousers as well here when that's been joined together, because you'll need that extra hem to give you the correct length. Hopefully that all makes sense and is another thing just to look out for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my fabric together, get tidied up a little bit, because again I've created chaos, and we'll start and cut out our fabric for our pyjamas and get started with the sewing. So when we're looking at cutting out our fabric, we want to be aware of which orientation the pattern pieces need to be. Now all of these pattern pieces need to be placed north to south really on the fabric, or depending on the size of your fabric, you may have to turn them east to west, okay? Just be careful not to put them on a diagonal. If you put them on a diagonal, you just change the whole properties of the garment itself, and unless it's something like felt that's a problem, because otherwise you've got to the fibres either run north to south or east to west, and we want to really work with those fibres. There is a list on my a video on my channel as well about bias and how we try to avoid the bias stretch by cutting either on straight of grain or across grain. So that's just it, and you can always tell which is the grain, because normally you'll have a selvage edge, which is the bound edge, and that normally get my words right, sorry, it always runs north to south on your fabric, and you cut it along the length that way. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to fold our fabric in half so that we cut 2 out at the same time, because on some of these pieces, especially on the front, it's not an equal piece, so we need to have one cut that way and one cut that way, so you've got a left front and a right front. You can't just cut 2 out on a single piece of fabric like that, because your pattern will be the fabric will be the wrong way round for you. So you've got to remember to cut 2 mirrored pieces. It'll all make sense, I promise. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold our fabric over and get that looking nice and straight. If you see my videos before, you can use a tape measure. Oops. Catch it. If you've seen my videos before, you can use a tape measure and just measure across at 3 points to make sure that you've got a straight edge, or you can measure across here to the selvage edge and you can make sure that you've folded over correctly to make sure everything's all straight. Just depends on how precise you want to be. So then we're going to have a look at our pattern pieces, and we're trying to cut these out as economically as possible, because we like to save our fabric if we can do. So the PJ bottoms we're not going to cut out just yet. I'm just going to cut out on these for the top. So I'm just going to move my fabric back until I've got a just wide enough piece to fit these on. Fabrics, I must admit, I am a bit of a fabric addict, and they do such beautiful designs, don't they? There's one, there's 2, and actually if I turn that one round, so be careful if you've got a directional fabric. A directional fabric is one where all of the design goes one way. I haven't got one to hand at the moment, but if it was say like llama heads or llamas or something like that, and the heads are all up that way, you can't then turn this piece of pattern piece upside down, because all your llamas will be upside down. So just bear that in mind. But if we turn this piece upside down here, then that can move further up and we save a little bit extra down at the bottom down here. I know it's only a little small amount that we're saving, but that could make a nice project sometime for somebody. Can't see it, can you? Sorry. Oops. Oh, I'm not very good at this orientation thing. So what I'm just saying is I'm putting my piece on there. I've turned this one here from there, where it was, where I'm going to lose 2 bits of triangle pieces here. And by turning it upside down, I can slot those 2 pieces there straight up against each other, which saves a little bit. But also this fabric piece here that goes on the fold, I can slide that right up as well, so that it saves this piece of fabric down here. So again, it's just trying to work how we can do to make sure that we've got as much fabric saved as possible. If you're Claire, that's what you do anyway. If it's you and fabric isn't a problem, just place your pattern pieces how you like. But for me, just make sure they're either all north to south or they're all east to west. And that way you'll have them matching with the same properties. So here you can see I've got all of my pieces for the PJ top, plus the waistband for the trousers onto my fabric now. I've still got the trousers to cut out, but I'm going to do that in a second. So just on this narrow strip now, without having to lose all of this down here, I've just pinned on my pattern pieces. So now all that remains is for me to use my scissors or my rotary cutter, and I'm just going to cut out the pieces. So I'm going to use this rotary cutter for those pieces that are straight, and then I'm going to then come in with my scissors for those pieces where there's a curve. Just suits my hands better. Still got a little bit of tendonitis actually in my wrist, so I do have to just be careful what I'm doing. And scissors definitely don't help. So there's our first bit to cut out. So that's the back, been cut on the fold so that when we open this up it's got 2 places. And what we need to do now is just do those 2 little snips on the side here, just very, very tiny ones, just into the fabric to just show us where those marks are so that we know for when we're sewing them together. Oops, just do another little one. It's not very clear. There we go, that's better. So I'm going to carry on now and just cut these out if you want to cut yours out too, and then we'll move on to the next stage. So once you've cut out all your pattern pieces, as I say, just make sure that you just go ahead and just mark in all of your notches, because we will need those to orientate ourselves later. They're the clues to our jigsaw puzzle. Yep, done that one. Done that one too. Yep. So I just need to do these as well. As I say, you're just doing a couple of millimetres cut into the fabric and just to mark where that triangle is. And that'll just be enough just to help you see where you need to go. Okay. So let's work on the trousers first. Because then once we've finished the top, then Luna can get ready and get dressed, can't she? Or whichever of your character you're making these for. Just take our pins out. Okay, so keep our pattern pieces to one side, and I've got just a freezer bag ready with the PJs written on it so that we've got that to hand. However works for you for storing your patterns, but this works really well for me. Okay, and we want the bits for the waistband as well. So we've got our notches in our fabric, so we know which is up and which is down. And we've cut out these 2 pieces because again it's not a symmetrical piece. Can you see that's a bit shorter than this is, a bit less deep? So if you'd have cut 2 out the same, you wouldn't end up with 2. I'm still just slightly going down that curve. You would end up with 2 pieces the same like that, and then when you try to join them together they wouldn't be right. You actually need 2 pieces so that when you put them down on your work surface, the deeper crotches match up together and the 2 narrow edges are further away, which the narrow curves are farther away, whichever way round you've got them, whether it's that way and the 2 together, so the 2 same curves match. Because if you've got a deep curve and a narrow curve matching, can you see the difference at the top here? that's not right, so we can't do that, because we can't join those two curves together, because you haven't got enough here to finish off that edge there. So that's why we need two what they call mirrored copies, where you have the curves together like that, and you've got the top part of your fabric. So that's what you want to do. Just orientate yourself with your pattern pieces and make sure you've got everything together, and then we'll move on to the next step. The first thing we're doing to do is get our trim, whatever you've chosen to use, and whether if you've got the remake kit, your trim won't. So bias binding is cut on the bias, so it's got some stretch to it, but also it opens up like this. It's generally folded, so the two raw edges are folded in towards the middle, and then if you've got some in the remake kit, or you've bought some that's embroidered on the edge, it might be showing like that, so it's actually folded over onto itself again, and then you'll have your embroidery on this side. But for me, I've just got this plainer checkered one. So what we want to do first is just lay the binding across the edge of the feet here, and this is why I've chosen to do the trousers first, because this is a nice straight edge to try and work with the binding first before we start working on anything else. So we're going to have this binding edge here, and I just want you to cut off two pieces, just enough just to go over with a little bit of an overlap, just to make it nice and easy. And we're just going to have two pieces because we've got two legs. Those things out of the way. And then put one with each one. If you want to, just put a pin in so that you remember where it is, because mine ends up on the floor quite often. I'm sure I'm not the only one. And then with the right side of your fabric up, what I want you to do is put the right side of the binding down onto your fabric. And then I'm just going to turn this upside down so it's easier to work with. So I've turned that trouser leg upside down. And then we're going to unfold one edge of the binding, and I'm going to pin it across the edge here. In actual fact, I would probably pin it this way instead, or try and make it easier to work with. So we're going to pin it like this. And I've pinned it across the edge here, so just pinned that across, because what we're going to do now is we're going to sew in the little fold just there, maybe just one little stitch or stitch width away from it, because we want this binding to encase this edge. So this is what we're going to do now. We're going to take our fabric to our machine, and then we're going to just sew a straight stitch, 2.2 stitch length, just a normal construction stitch, and we're just going to sew down that line there as our guide, removing our pins as we go. We don't sew over our pins because they can damage our machine or our needle, or break our needle. So that's what I'm going to do. So just going to line my machine up. Centre of my presser foot here is lined up with the crease on here on the binding, and then I'm just going to start stitching a couple of stitches back just to see on my edges. I'm going to press the needle down button so my needle always finishes in my work before I take my pins out, so I don't dislodge anything as I'm working. And I'm just going to sew straight across the bottom, taking the pins out as I go. Needle up, slip my threads. My snips. And there we've got the first edge sewn, so we can see we're just on that curve, well, slightly off there, but you get the idea. Because then what we're going to do then is we're going to then fold that fabric up and over itself where we've just had it. Finger press it if you need to, but then we're then going to fold it again over to the back, and that's going to then encase our raw edge seam. Now, my tip for you when you're doing binding is, if you can, you want to be able to feel the back fold on the other side of your fabric here. That will make sure that you always catch it when you go to sew it down, because it's very, very easy to sew just here and have your binding not quite covered, and you won't catch the back of your binding and it'll flap up again. So if you can get into the habit of just making sure that the fold, you can just feel it with your fingernails underneath, and as I say, if you put a pin right on the edge here, just there, hopefully you can see this, then when you turn it over you can see you've caught your pin, and if your pin is just below where your edge of your binding is on the front and we stitch now on the front here, you're going to be able to know that you've caught that. I do stitch on the edge of my binding. You can try and stitch in the ditch if you want to, which is in this gap just here, but I find if I'm just a millimetre or so into my binding, it still looks neat, but it just means that you're guaranteed to catch it. Whereas if you stitch in the ditch, again, you've not got a lot to play with. It's easy as you take your pins out for the fabric then just to jump back a little bit and expose that edge as well, so that you're not catching it. So again, we're just catching this all the way along. So working with binding is quite a fiddly thing, but once you've got it mastered with a few tips and tricks, most of the time you'll get it right. I'm not going to say all the time because binding has a mind of its own, but that's what we're going to look like at the end with our binding on the bottom of our trouser legs. So I'm going to now just line up my machine. I'm going to put it in so that I'll just stitch just a couple of millimetres into here. We're going to go nice and slow. It's not a time for zooming because we're top stitching. And if you want to turn up your stitch length as well, then you can do. So now for me, I'm going to line up this stitch area here with a line on my machine, on my presser foot. I don't know if you can see, but there's a line between where it goes plastic and where it goes metal, and I'm going to use that for lining up with. So I'm going to put my stitch onto number 2, and then I'm going to take my stitch length up to a 2.8, just because I like a slightly longer stitch for a top stitch. I'm not going to backwards and forwards because that's going to be hidden in this seam here. So that should then, oh, the other thing is I'm going to just move my needle across just so that it's 1 millimetre, so it's just in the binding. Couple of stitches back, and as I say, if you've got a speed control, turn it down because you want this to be nice and slow. Keep my finger in the way so that it holds onto the fabric for me, doesn't let it shift. Just go slower if you need to. And then you'll be able to see exactly where you're going so that you can tell how far you've gone. As I say, keep needling your work just to keep that going down. Go off and look careful. Oops, went a bit wobbly there. I'll have a look at it and see whether I like it or not. If not, I'll undo it and then redo it. Oh yes, no, I don't like that. So as you can see, I didn't have my needle in my work and I've taken my attention off and I've just gone off slightly. It was my husband coming back from the basketball who's just knocked on the door. So I'm going to just go and say hello to him quickly, and I'll unpick this and then I'll finish it off and we'll start on the next one. So I've got a little tip for you when you're unpicking. If you can, always unpick from the back when you're putting your unpicker under your stitches and pulling them, and try and pull them with the back edge of your unpicker, not with the bladed edge, because that'll allow you to have a longer string. Okay, like this one, I've got a little bit of a knot at the end there, so I'm just take that little knot off, and you'll see it just pulls straight through. Because what that does is it just means that if you're going to snag anywhere, you don't want to snag the front of your work. The other thing that you can then do is, you can see I've deliberately left 2 long tails here, and that's how I like to do my unpicking, because then if I go onto the back side of the fabric, and then if you just ease the edge of the binding away from your piece of fabric that you're working on, you can use the back of your quick unpick again to pull those threads. So I've just pulled it apart so I could see the stitch, then I've just hooked under the stitch with the back of my quick unpick, and then you can pull these 2 loops through. Now if you look on the front, there's no raw edge there, no loose thread there, and neither there. And what you can do, and I do find it easier to try and tie the knots when I've got my quick unpick in my hand, is if you tie a knot, this can help you just get it through. Get it right. So there's once, and twice. And then sometimes, as I say, you can use your quick unpick to help the thread comes through the loop. Then if you lay those two threads, obviously you can cut them a little bit shorter if you wanted to, but lay them inside that binding now. And when you come to rejoin, we're going to start directly where that last stitch is. So there's like an invisible join, if you like, and I'll show you what to do with the ends when we get to the end again. So that's what I've done. I'm just going to put the pin back in again to hold the back of the binding down. So I'm just feeling with my finger at the back to make sure I've got the fold. Oops, dropped my pin. And put the pin in along there. Oops. And just check on the back to make sure that I've got it pinned, and I have, so it's nice and neat and it's nice and even. And then when you go back to your machine, we're going to put the presser foot down first, which is a bit counterintuitive sometimes to when we're trying to line things up, because then I want you to use your hand crank on your machine at the end here, you know, your round circle, and then you can then lower your needle down towards the work. So I've lowered it down further, and now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust by lifting up my presser foot at the back, find the end of that stitch. Might need my glasses on, hold on 1 second. I think I will for this close work. Just find the end of that stitch where it just goes into the work. I think mine's just there, because then I can then put my needle down into my work, and I know that where I'm starting is exactly where I stopped. And then I'm again going to just now, I'm not going backwards and forwards. Keep your needle in your work if you need to or want to, because it just helps anchor it down. I'm just making sure I'm right on that very edge. Stitch back and stitch forward, needle up. Well, it's better than it was. This is the thing with binding, you could be unpicking and picking all the time. You've just got to get to a point where you're happy with it. So again, we've got these two now threads where we started. They're a bit longer than I need. Let me just trim a little bit off. So what I want to do now is I want you to determine which is the back thread and give it a little pull, and it will just pull the threads through, and then with your quick unpick there should be a little loop, which is because obviously the two threads form the stitch, don't they? And you should be able to find the little loop on the back here with your quick unpick. We don't want that big loop because that's the stitch that's formed. We want this other little one here, and pull it through, and you could probably just see it pulling through. So now if we look at this now, looks like an invisible join. Nobody will tell that we went wrong there and that we unpicked part of it, because it's absolutely just carried on. And all I do then is hold on to my threads at the back here, just tighten them up a little bit again. Oops, can't separate them, hold on 1 second. I'll separate those threads again, just give them a little pull to hold them tight. And then I just do 2 little knots, and just this way so we can get them nice and tight. So I've just got 2 little knots on the back there now. Now I don't snip it, what I do, oh sorry, just bumped you, is I then get a needle which I then thread with both threads together. Oops. Come on, needle, you know you want to be threaded. Right. Both threads together. Pull the ends through. And then what I do is I go back in really close to where the first stitch was that I came out. And I'm going to run the needle through the edge of the binding on the inside of the fold, if you like, for quite a way. So I'm not going through to the front of the work, and you won't be able to see the threads on the back of the work either, so that's needles just running in between that fold. Then once we've gone about 1 inch, then I'll then come out and pull on my threads, and if you give them a nice little pull, that knot will just about, there it goes, just disappeared into your work. I'll put the needle away so I've got that saved for another day, and put a little bit of tension on your threads when you snip them, and nobody will ever tell that you had a join in that thread. but you know, it's never going to come undone, it's never going to start and unravel on you, but you've got it all nice and neat. So it is a little bit wobbly, but it's within my tolerance level, so I'm going to go with it, and I'm happy with that. So once we finish doing that, we're then just going to snip off these ends here. Oops, that one flying, didn't it? And then you can then repeat for the other leg as well, which I've already done. Oops, put my bits in the bin. That's it. And there we have 2 legs bound and ready. So hopefully that was all open. I'm hoping I've got you all on camera and that you've seen all of that. I'll just check the footage just to make sure before we carry on, but that's a good way of you being able to match that, and that works for any kind of your sewing. If you have to stop a seam, just stop and then just thread it through into the back of the work if you can do, and just vary it some way. But yeah, so that's our binding on the bottom. So if that's your first foray into binding, then give yourself a pat on the back, because it's not easy, but if you can follow those steps, then generally you should get a really acceptable level of binding all the way through. Okay, so that's what it did record. Right, the next thing that we're going to do now is we're going to sew these into individual legs. So take each piece individually, and we're just going to fold it over so that we've got the right sides together and so that we're matching up our binding. And then we're just going to put a pin in at the bottom, and then we're going to again go to the centre, the end of this line here. This will actually end up being the centre and the crotch between the legs, and then we're going to put a pin in there. And those two should line up perfectly, and mine do, so that's good. If they don't, just ease them so that you're splitting the difference each time. So you know you start making your start and stop points equal first before then you move on to the rest. Put in as many pins as you need to be comfortable, or you can use binding clips, the little clip things that we've used before, if you prefer to use those, or if you're working with young children, because then you've not got the point of the needles. And then what we're going to do then is start here, back tack there, and then sew all the way down to the bottom and back tack again here. So that's what we're going to do now. So let me just bring my machine forward, and we're going to do that on both legs. So let's reset our stitches again, because we were over to one side before. So I'm going to go back to my centre stitch, and we're just using 1/4 inch seam allowance on here to make sure we've got enough room for Luna's legs and bottom, or any of the other characters. So just back tack at the end. Just remove your stitches, put your needle in your work if you need to, and then just remove the pins. So putting your needle down into your work, even if you have to hand crank it down, then that's a good idea, because it just means that your work won't shift underneath whilst you're working with your pins. I'm just going to reverse at the end. Take our needle up and snip our threads. Now the other little thing well, first of all, we're then going to think about whether we're going to neaten the edges or not. I would suggest you do, and the way that you can do that, if you've got an overlocker, use an overlocker, but if you haven't, then you're going to just move on to a zigzag stitch. So mine's number 8. We only want it to be narrow, so I'm going to choose a number 3, and then the stitch length is 2. I'm going to take that down to a 1.5. Yeah, let's try 1.5. I'm just going to go down, and what you want is you want your zig to be in your fabric, but your zag just to be either very much on the edge or just slightly off the edge here. And we're just putting those 2 seams together. So you'll see it do a few stitches in one place, then it'll start zigzagging for me. So I'm just going to take it so it's just off the edge. Stitch could probably be done with being just a little bit wider, so let me just take that up. Let's try 3.5 instead. That's better. So 3.5 is better, just to get the coverage on the edge that we need. Going over the edge here and just reverse. And that'll just limit the fraying. That's just giving us that little, so that was the 3. And that's the 3.5, so I think the 3.5 is much better on the width of the distance between the seam and where it's going across. The next thing that I want you to do, and this is a little finishing tip of mine, is The longer curve is the back. And what I don't like is when Luna's wearing her PJs, that's what I'm making, isn't it? PJs, not dungarees, is that this little bit here sticks out. So what I'm going to suggest that you do, oh, if you can see, what I'm going to suggest you do is just fold that to one side, just finger press to make sure that your seam's nice and neat, and then I'll just put a little stitch to hold that seam down. I know it seems a little bit unnecessary, but when you see Luna wearing them, you'll understand what I mean. If you've not done it, and then obviously you can go back and do it anytime you like. So let's take it off the zigzag for now. I'm just going to do a few stitches forward and back. Just getting caught on my binding. Come on. So if your machine will go through and will do what you want it to do, then that's great. Mine's just not cooperating with me today on that piece. So just unpick the stitches to make sure that that's all nice and neat. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a needle and thread and just do a couple of stitches. And I could even, if I wanted to do it invisibly, just tack down here, the back here against the binding, and that'll just hold it down. So I'll do that in a moment. But for now, let's put that to one side. Let's go on to our other leg, and we're just going to repeat the same process. We're going to match up the binding, match up the crotch seam, oops, can't see, I must have nudged you, sorry, my apologies. So match up the crotch seam, match up the binding, go in between, and put in as many pins as you need along the length to make it work. Back in the work again, we're on a straight stitch again, 2.2 length. Needle down in our work just to hold it steady while we're manipulating those pins in and out. Through that binding to make sure that we're straight and we're not going to unravel. Trim our threads. Oops. And then again we're back to establishing where the biggest curve is on the back here, which is this one, and that's the direction I want to put that seam towards. And oh, not zigzagged. We'll zigzag first. So let me just change my stitch to the right one, and we liked 3.5 length, didn't we, and a 1.5 width stitch length, sorry. Okay, so hold on to my threads. Just go down the bottom of the binding. If you do get any little whiskers like this, then just feel free just to snip those off with your snips, making sure you don't go through any of your zigzaggy stitches, and that'll just neaten that off for you as well, and just make sure no new ones arrive. Stick out, you know what I mean. Right, okay, so that's neatened that up just nicely. So back now to where we were, towards the back, which is the highest arc, and we're just going to push the binding towards that side. Oops, thread doesn't want to go. And then catch that down, and that will just hold that down so that it's nice and neat from the outside. So let me just do that, and I'll come back to you. So we've got two trouser legs now. Both have been fastened down at the edges there, just to keep it nice and neat. And you can take these to your ironing board and just press the seam open, or just finger press it for now if you're happy to do that. And what we want to do is we want to have one, well, if we turn them both the other way around, then I can just finger press that seam, can't I? That'll just help us. The next one. Okay. So 2 trouser legs completed. What we want to do now is turn one of them back the wrong way, so that you've got one the right way round and one inside out and one the right way round, because then what we want to do is put the one that is the right way round inside the one that is the wrong way round. So this is my one that's the right way round, because you can see that the seam there is nice and neat, and we've got the outside nice bit of the binding just there. This is the one that's inside out, because we've got the zigzag seam just there, and we're literally just going to tuck one inside the other and pull it down, and we're going to keep them straight so that these two at the bottom here, the two edges where we've done the binding, the edges, the seam that we sewn is together, and again here we want to make sure that the seam that we've sewn here is together as well, so that those two seams there, so one leg and the second leg, are going to match perfectly. So let's put a little pin in there just to hold that for us, and then we can then match up the top of our curves, and you should have a long curve against a long curve, and you should have a short curve against the short curve for the trouser legs. So here's what I mean, there's the long curve look, and this one's slightly shorter. So they should match up perfectly. If not, you might have you've done something wrong. You've either sewn one leg inside out. If your fabrics, the front and the back is very similar, you might have sewn one inside out, or you've not mirrored your pattern when you were tracing it. Now the other thing we have to be aware of, we'll use red pins to mark this, is that we've got a notch just there, and also just further down just there. So I'm going to put two red pins in there. I'll just change that colour pin so I don't confuse you. Because we're going to leave it open between these two notches, because that's where we can poke out a little tail for one of our characters if we need to. So you should have something that looks like this. So you've got one leg inside the other. If you look from the top, you can see that both, oops, I can't get it right, both right sides of the fabric are together, and the wrong sides of the fabric are out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew down here this centre seam. This is the centre seam that's going to go between the legs all the way round till we hit a red pin, and we're going to do a back tack and stop there, and then we're going to cut our threads and start again here, back tack here, and then sew up to here and back tack again there, and that'll give us that little opening there just for a character tail. And this is the same for all trousers really, this construction process. So whether you're making Reynard's breeches, or you're making Alfie's trousers, or the dungarees, this process is all the same for those. So that's pretty good to know, I think, really, because you know that once you've mastered this and you've understood the construction order for these pyjama trousers, and even the French knickers, if you're making the French knickers, or if you're doing some boxer shorts for Alfie, or French knickers for Luna, then again this is the same construction method that we're using for those. So there's quite a lot all in one that you'll learn with making these, so that's why it's worth persevering. So we're back on to stitch number 1, because I'm going to do a straight stitch, so it's number 1 on mine. 1/4 inch seam allowance. Taking out my first pin because my presser foot is holding my fabrics, holding on to my tails, and we're just going to go down and reverse. And just follow the edge of the seam. We're going to put our needle in our work, because we're going to now adjust this, because we're going to come round this curve here. So what I do is just put my fingers inside, make sure that all the fabric in front of your needle is flat as you're sewing here, want that flat, and then just keep following your marker, and just keep moving your fabric slightly over to the left as you go round your curve, and that'll maintain your seam for you. So keep going round, because it's here that we've got to be careful of, but we can match it up as we go round. So as you can see, and if you need to put your needle in your work, you can stop, and then you can then lift your presser foot up, and you can angle however you wish to make sure that you're right. Just roll your trousers round towards you so that you can see where you're working, and just use your fingers to make sure that your fabric's flat underneath where you're going to be sewing next. And if you have to do a centimetre at a time, just do a centimetre at a time. Just take your time with it.
So I'm going to take this pin out now. It's going to get in my way. But my needle is in my work, so it's anchoring it down, so I can just adjust myself, and you're just rolling them for the opening forward as you go. And I'm just as the trousers are moving through underneath the needle, I'm also just moving the work slightly to the left as well, and that's helping me get round this curve. Nice and gently. And if you need to, you can always press your foot up and just reposition. Just try not to do too much if you're doing that, because it can give you a bit of a jagged seam. So you're trying to keep the seam smooth. Ah, now pin there, red pin, that was our reminder, wasn't it? Just to go forward and go back. So that's then anchored that. So let's take the work out here. Cut our edges off and cut off our starting threads as well. And then what we're going to do now is rejoin here at this pin, which is the other red one, and then sew to the end. So that's why I try to use red pins if I can for that, because it does remind you as you're just sewing, otherwise I'd have just carried straight on. Get into your flow, don't you, and forget to then check back. So start and stop, and up to the top. Reverse stitch there just to hold that in place. And take our trousers out. So what I'm also going to do now is I am just going to neaten off these edges as well, because at the moment we've got little whiskers coming from this edge just here where the tail's going to go, because if I just pull these two sides apart, you can see we've got a hole in there, which is completely deliberate, but all of this is going to continue to fray. So, and I don't want to sew those bits together, because this seam will be pressed open in order to accommodate the tail. So while it's just lying flat like this, it's a good idea just to separate out one of your seam allowances. Just finger press it so that you've got your way forward all the way through. You can go ahead and iron this if you want to, but it's a little bit fiddly with the iron. So that's why I'm going to finger press, because then it preserves my fingers. I don't get them burnt off them. And you can quite often make quite a difference just with a little bit of finger pressing. So just pressing that seam open. And then I'm going to do the same again, but this time I can go all the way down, because I'm just going to zigzag one side of the pyjamas, one side of the seam at a time. So let's put it back onto my zigzag stitch. I'm going to go back to a 3.5 width and a 1.5 length. So press the foot down on my work, hold on to my threads. Press the foot down, needle down in my work while I change it. Now the other thing is that sometimes it can bunch it up a little bit as you're zigzagging, but hopefully it'll still be okay for you. Just make sure that if you're stopping, your needle is in your work, it's not outside of your work. And then again. That's it. I've got a squeaky foot pedal. I don't know if you can hear it or not. Okay, cut our threads, and you can see I've got one or two little longer whiskers here, so I'm just going to trim those off. Not through my stitches, just trimming it back to the seam that we've just neatened. And it has bunched it over. There's not as much fabric, so it doesn't lie quite as flat, but it will just have neatened that edge off. So let's just cut our starting threads, and then we're going to turn our pyjamas over this way. Oops. Oh, turn them inside, turn them the other way, I think will be the easiest way. And then we can work on that other seam. So I've just still got both legs inside each other at the moment, just while I'm neatening these seams. And then again we can now fold this seam out now. We've got the other one that we've already done, just tucked out of the way now. And we're just going to go down the other side.
And neatening your seams will make the clothes last longer. Just helps prevent any fraying and just from the seams unravelling, because you're only using 1/4 inch seams, so you've not got a lot really before you're unravelling your garment. So again, just keep adjusting your trousers and just keep turning them. Just make sure they don't get folded up underneath and that you then zigzag over some of your trousers. That's why it's best to keep them the two legs inside each other. Always make sure your needle's finishing it in your sewing, otherwise it'll pull apart. We've got a very narrow seam just here, so let's see how we get on. Threads off and then just go back and trim off some of these longer threads that we've got just sticking out. Just to neaten it up. Let's cut off our starting threads. Okay. So this is where we are at the moment then. So we've still got two legs inside each other. We've got both the seams now stitched down, and if we look very carefully, we've got a little hole through which our character's tail can go. The other thing that I just do, first of all, we'll open them out, so I'll do that bit first. So all we're going to do now is just going to pull on the leg that's inside the other one and just pull it out, and then pull up the whole garment so that it's the right way round, and you'll see that you've got a pair of trousers. Just like that. Isn't it magic? Okay, so what we're going to do now is, just to neaten off this edge again around the tail, stop it from pulling forward, I just run some stitches along here, along the opening, just to hold it flat. So I'm going to work from this side where I can see where my seam allowance is. I'm just going to pull the front of the trousers out of the way. So that's nice and flat there. Find my threads and pop it under. And then just on the edge of that seam, I'm just going to sew the seam allowance down to the actual garment itself. Oops, still on a zigzag, hold on 1 second. Put onto number 2, that'll be good. Okay. Start and stop. Make sure your seam allowance is lying flat and you can see the end of where your slit is. When you get to the bottom, put your needle in your work, lift up your presser foot and twist it across. So you're now coming across the seam. Just a couple of stitches is all you need. And then we're going to then go down the other side. And all this is doing is it's just going to hold open the sides of where the tail go through and stop anything from rubbing on that. And again, just a couple of stitches back the other way and then reverse and then forward just to finish off. Take the needle out of our work. Just cut through our threads. You can just see where I just had a start of a zigzag on there. Get rid of all my threads. They do like to stick, don't they, to certain kinds of fabrics. And there we go. We've got our little bit of a zigzag there for mine, but yours will be perfect, I'm sure. And it's just holding those seam allowances outside, so you've got a nice little neat little hole for popping a tail through. So next we're going to do some work on the waistband. So here's our two pieces of waistband, and if we have them right sides out, then we can see that they've got a curve to them. They're not two straight pieces of fabric, and that's because the back of the trousers curves. But what I want you to do is locate where you've got your snips in the work. There's my 2 there. Where's my other 2? there's one. So it must be here then, 2, there it is. And what I want to do is I want to put them so that the two snips are matching up with the 2 snips on the back here, because then that tells us we've got the right edges together. And I'm not going to pin this because it's only a short seam, but match your ends together there once you've located those two snips together. So the 2 snips go on top of the 2 snips, and then we're going to do a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance up and down here, and the same at the other end. Back tack as well when you start and stop. That's one side done. I'm going to work on the other side. This is just the short sides of that waistband, and then I'm just going to finger press that open. Just so those threads will hold, that seam will hold flat for me. Right. Locate those points again where you've got your snip marks. I've got one there and I've got 2 down here, because of the side that's other to that, not the side with the snips in, the other side, I want to neaten this edge. So we're going to zigzag from this edge. So I'm going to start at one of the side seams here. It'll actually be a centre front seam, I think, but we'll start at that seam there, put it back onto my zigzag stitch, and we're going to go back to a 3.5, wasn't it? 3.5 and a 1.5 on the zigzag. Hold on to my threads, and we're going to go all the way around the loop and just neaten that edge. When you come to your seam allowances, try and, if you can, make sure that they're pressed open like this and that they stay open. So let's just go ahead and do that. And then you work, but make sure you're in your actual fabric on a zigzag when you're stopping. Over that seam it's open because I can feel it with my fingers. Just try not to stretch your waistband if you can help it, just treat it delicately because it is a bit on a curve. A couple of stitches over just to tie that off, take our threads off, and again I'm just going to snip off any whiskers that we've got. Obviously if you've got an overlocker you can overlock this as well, and that's a lovely neat edge too, and I have, but I think the majority of people haven't, so that's why I'm using my zigzag, just to show you. It's a perfectly acceptable finish as well. So there we've got one zigzagged edge, and our side that's got our snips in is still intact, so we can still match our marks up with our waistband. Because now what we're going to do is this is our trousers, we're now going to match this up. So the centre seam will go to the centre, or centre front or centre back, and if we look here we've got one snip there and one snip there in the side. There's one just here, can you see? My quick unpick so I can show you. There's one snip just there, look, and there's one snip just there. If you've got 2 snips together, then you've got them, well, no, you've got the back of the trousers, because that's where those are on the front, and then on the back here I've got 2 snips here, 1, 2, and then I've got another 2 snips on here, so that's right. So 1 snip means the front, 2 snips means the back. So let's get it the right way round. That's it. So we're going to match the centre front with the centre front. So this seam here is going to be opened up and is going to match perfectly onto there, and put a pin in. I'm going to put a pin in from the inside because we're actually going to stitch these from the inside, and then match your notches up as you go round, pin in from the inside. We're going to go to the back, centre back,
and we're going to match those up as well so that they're perfectly matched as well. And just match your seams up as you go around. Again, notches matching there for the back, so there's 2 notches there, match those up. Just keep checking that I'm in camera, otherwise I have to do it all over again. And then here we've got a little bit of excess, so I'm just going to put a little bit of pressure on the fabric and it should ease out for you. There's a little bit of a curve there. It just means that my seam allowance here wasn't quite the same as my seam allowance there. But on the whole, they're pretty, they match up really well and really nicely, and I can just make sure as I'm going around that I even it out. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make sure we're on the right stitch, so back to a straight stitch. And I'm going to put my start and stop at the back. So I've located where the hole is and where my centre back is. And I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance, starting and stopping at this back seam, going all the way around. So when we stop a needle in our work, just to anchor it down. Just take your time. Just turn your trousers as you need to make sure that it's all flat, and just run your finger along the front of here and just make sure that where you're going to be sewing has not got any puckers in it. Roll again and take the pin out. So just pull it just so that it's nice and flat. Make sure you can see both raw edges. And then take our pin out again. Our seam allowance is nice and flat. I'm nearly at the beginning again, so just pull our threads out that way. Just make sure those 2 raw edges are together. Just back tack again just to hold our stitches. Our threads off. So here we've got our waistband sewn onto our trousers all the way around. We've got some threads, we don't need to worry about those. You can neaten this edge if you want to, but it's going to be encased in a minute, so you don't really need to worry about it. And then what I would do is I'd take that to the ironing board, and you're going to first press it flat like this. So open it out and press it flat. Oh, got threads. And then we're then going to use that as the fold line, and we're going to fold our trousers over and press the waistband to the inside of our trousers. So let me just go and do that, and then we can then move on to the next. So we've got the perfectly, well, almost perfect matching centre seam there, and the back seam is there as well. So yeah, they're really great. So there's the hole. So we're doing well with these. We're nearly finished actually, folks. That's good. So let's just go and iron these open, and if you want to cut down on any bulk, where you've got your little seam allowances here, the little triangles, so you know how these are straight at the top, you can just take off the little corner like that if you want to. Same with dressmaking, you can just whip those off, because you're not compromising this seam here at all, but it just cuts down bulk in that corner. It's only a smidge, but sometimes it can make a difference. Off, and then go this side here, and it's just those little ears there, can you see? So it's the top of the seam allowance, so it's not, we're not going through these, cutting through these stitches at all, and we're not cutting straight across because you don't want to make that seam any shorter. You're just taking off that at a diagonal. You can see just going at, it's just at a diagonal. If I put the scissors behind, you might be able to see. Just takes away that bulk. Right, let's go and iron these then. So first thing I'm going to do is just going to press the seam this way first. Just press it down and just set our stitches. The next thing I'm going to do then is I am going to open these out, and we're going to be pressing the seam allowance up into the waistband.
So just put your nose of your iron on there, and that should be enough just to do that, just to get it set for you. We will do it from the other side again in a minute, but just doing it this way to start. If you were making shorts or trousers for yourself, jogging bottoms, things like that, all of these stages are exactly what you would do with those types of things as well. So when I say that when you make lunar garments, you are learning how to dressmake in full, it's correct. You really are learning such a lot, but without the risk of having to spend a lot of money on a lot of expensive fabric to start off with. So just turn these round the right way, and we're just going to again just press from this side, and we're just making sure that all of that fabric is pulled up towards the waistband and that we've not got anything folded under to make the waistband any smaller. Try from this side, see if that's any easier for you to see. So here, can you see how that's just folded, that's just ironed under a little bit, so I can pull that, make sure it's right. Watch your fingers. Just make sure that that's all pulled out correctly, because as you go around those corners, you do need it to be flat. Okay. And then the last stage then is just to fold it over on that edge just there, all the way around. And then we're just going to press that again to make sure that that edge, the sewn edge, is right on the edge. Give it a little blast of steam, that always helps too. And of any loose threads. Just roll it between your fingers if you need to, and that will just help it come to the top. And again here, just make sure that's all nice and flat. Folded that out slightly, and just do that bit again. There we go. So if I turn these around the right way now, oops, come on, let's get your legs out. That's it. Then you can see that we've got a lovely, nice, neat edge there, lovely centre front seam there. The trousers slightly higher at the back because they need to keep over the bottom when the character is sitting. And what we're going to do now is just create a channel for the elastic by now stitching just the other side of our zigzag, just here, and that'll then keep a channel for our elastic. The thing to remember is, then I'm going to leave my hole at centre back, is that we just need to leave a little gap for a safety pin to get through so that we can thread our elastic. So I normally go through about here, or you can do it on the side if you want to, just leave a little gap, and then you'll be able to just thread your elastic through, and we'll close it up afterwards. Perhaps doing it here will be easier for you to see. So let's get our red pins again, just to remind me, on this side seam here. We only need about ½ inch or something, or not even that. You need more than ¼ inch because you need to be able to manipulate it, but say ½ inch, which is maybe a couple of centimetres, and we're going to just leave it open. So I'll start here, back tack, and then go round, and then I'm going to finish here and back tack, and then I'll come back and I'll just neaten that bit up and join it together. So I won't do too much of a back tack, and then that'll give us the hole then for the elastic to thread through. So if you feel like you want to put a couple of pins in just to hold this down, then do. Just remember not to use red pins, because we're going to use red pins for our start and stop. Or if you've not got a different coloured pins, the other thing that I've done before as well is I put a double pin very close together, and that just reminds me as well to start and stop in the same place. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You don't have to go off and buy anything special. And if you were making these trousers by hand as well, just all the same steps. Even the zigzagging, you just do a little overcast stitch over the edge of the fabric, and that'll just, oh, that's a red one, we don't use red ones, do we? Not listening to myself.
you can just do a little overcast stitch over those seams just to, or you could do French seams if you wanted to as well. I've got a YouTube channel. No, I haven't got a skill builder yet on French seams, but that will be coming at some stage. So yeah, you might have to do a quick look up to see how to do French seams on YouTube. So let's start first. Let's put our presser foot down. Take out our starting pins because we know where we're going to be starting. Make sure that you can see. And then what we're going to do then is just position our needle across to the left. So I can do that with a touch of a button, just adjust it slightly. And then we're then going to sew round with a start and stop, just a couple of stitches, nice and neat. And then we're just going to put a needle down into our work and then carry along following the edge of the waistband just above where we've zigzagged. Trying to keep it nice and even as we go. And just again, just roll your trousers towards you as you're going, and if you need to just give a little pull then you can do, just to make sure everything's all flat. And you are having to follow the curve of the trousers on these, so just bear that in mind. It's not just a straight zoom straight across, but just take your time, and as I say, just adjust your direction if you need to. There you go. There we go. Stop threads getting in the way. Let's just move those out of the way for us. There you go. Oops, that's one there too. I've got a little bit of bunching up in front of this needle. You can always just let your presser foot up and then just give a little pull, and it should just ease up the pressure under that presser foot for you, and then enable you to carry on and sew it flat. If you've got a lot of a pucker underneath, it could be that you use a different seam allowance at the centre front on your waistband than you did on your trousers. So just be aware of that when you're sewing these, because it's got to match perfectly. So back to our red pin, so we know we've got about ½ an inch to go before we then back tack. Okay, so needle out of our work. Cut our threads. And then we've got a nice channel sewn for our elastic, and we've got a little hole here where we can thread the elastic through. So that's the bit I'm going to go on to next. So I've just got Wilhelmina, and she's just showing off her tummy for us, because we're going to just wrap the tape measure around her tummy and just see where we need to start and stop our elastic. And she's just done, she's 9¼ inches on her waist. I think Sarah says to have a 9-inch piece of elastic, so we want to be slightly less than the waist circumference, because you want it to have a little bit of tension on it so that it grips onto their tummy, but not too tight. So again, I think I'll cut mine at 9, and then by the time we've overlapped it 1/4 inch and sewn it together on the ends, that'll take it down to a nice little length. So I'm just going to go and cut a 9-inch piece of elastic. So here we are, I've got my reel of elastic. If you've got a kit, you'll have your piece in. So without stretching it, I'm just laying the tape measure just by the side of it, just moving myself along, and then when we get to the 9 inches, I'm going to use my snips and just snip that off. And then I need a safety pin, which is in my little pot here. You know I like my takeaway pots for keeping my sewing supplies in, rather than put them into landfill. I think I'll just use these. This one should be big enough, so you would just want a pin that's big enough to go through the narrowest part. That should go through there. Yeah, that should go through. And then all we do is we attach our safety pin onto our elastic. I go through twice normally. And then remembering to keep hold of the end, the loose end, because it's very difficult to find it if not. We're then going to feed the elastic into the channel,
Just make sure it goes past your zigzaggy stitches, right? And the best way that you can secure this down is by just using another safety pin or a pin and just attach it to the body of your trousers. Or you can just attach it to the actual elastic itself, just so. And then by pushing, if you're using your one set of fingers to push the safety pin, you'll never push the elastic through because that's flexible. So you have to push through on the elastic, on the safety pin, and it'll pull through on the channel. And then if you pull back, you can then thread it through. So push through, push through, push through. Then grip it with this finger here, and then just pull that elastic through. And you just keep doing that. When you come to the seam allowances, you just have to wiggle through until you can get your safety pin through, but you should be able to manage it, unless your channel's too small, and then you need a smaller safety pin. And all you do is just keep pushing along and then pulling it through. And then as it gets tighter, you can then pull it through. But this is where your elastic, if you're not careful, you'll get to the other side and you'll have pulled your elastic through, which is why I suggest you tack it onto your garment somehow, just to secure. And here we're at the front again, so I'm just having to wiggle the head of the pin till I can tell that it's come through the other side of the seam allowance. And then we're back to the hole again. So when I get back to the hole again, I take my needle out, my pin out, holding onto it very carefully, take that safety pin off, and then I undo this safety pin, and the next thing I do is put those two ends together and safety pin them together before I start to check my elastic is all straight, because otherwise it's all going to go disappearing back inside again. And that should just hold the elastic on the outside. So what I'm feeling for now is that I've not got any twists in my elastic all the way around. The other thing that we can do is we can try our trousers onto our character as well. So Wilhelmina, you get to try these. She's got very bendy legs as Wilhelmina. And we're just going to make sure that elastic is tight enough. And also I can show you that we've got the little hole for her tail to come through. Oops. Come on, Wilhelmina, let's thread your tail through. Right, there we go. Anybody else talk to their characters whilst they're sewing with them? It's not just me, I'm sure. So there we go. Nicely fitting trousers there. Perfectly positioned hole. And they're going to be lovely when she's sitting on the shelf. So I'm happy with those. They're not too tight and not too loose. So we're going to take these trousers back off again. Sorry, Wilhelmina, you can have them later. Just pop her skirt down for Dr. Modesty. There you go, thank you. And then back to the trousers again. So first thing we need to do is to finish off this elastic and just make sure that's not going to go anywhere. So all I do is just put some tension on the elastic and pull it out of the garment a little bit. And then you need a needle and thread. Just do a couple of knots, just a knot to hold that together. And then when we undo it, so I haven't got any tension on the elastic at this point, so I can let go with my fingers. And then what I'm going to do is just going to lie one on top of the other like this. You can melt the ends if you want, but be careful you don't set your pyjama bottoms on fire. But for these, I don't think they're going to have that much pressure. It's not like it's an adult pair of PJs that are being wrenched up and wrenched down. So here we go. Just do a few little overcast stitches on the edges on one side. And then just go through to the other side. And do a few overcast stitches. You can do this on the machine, but to be honest, by the time you've fiddled and tried to get it underneath the presser foot and for it not to have shifted, I do find that it's just as easy just to put a few hand stitches in it, but it's your choice. So a few stitches on top of each other here, just to cast that off and just to hold that nice and still. Take the needle and thread off. I'm just going to trim those threads because I don't like to see those going back in. That's just where we've pulled it through the pyjamas. And then we can then pull on the sides of the pyjamas and our elastic will disappear inside our channel that we've made for the waistband. And all that needs to happen now is we just go back onto the machine and we just sew this bit here just to close that gap up. Just making sure that we don't catch the elastic in our stitches when we're sewing that down, because we don't want to go through the elastic wants to be able to move freely in the channel. So there we go, one pair of PJ bottoms all ready and done with a higher back and a lower front. We've got our binding on the edge and that's looking all nice and neat, and as I say, I've tacked that down just so it's not sticking out at the end. So let's grab our pieces for our pyjama top and we'll get those made.